Drum roll. Yes! Hello, everybody! Welcome back for another episode, if not now, when? Today, everybody, I have a special guest fly all the way from UK to all of you. We got James Lowe here with us. And James, today, he is a co-founder and CEO at Mana, a platform for everybody to share their passion, whether it's one-on-one session, live classes, or subscription content. Mana, wow, closed 1.5 million euro at pre-seed round in 3 months ago, which is impressive. And prior to entrepreneurship, James was a SoftBank Vision Fund, where he worked on strategic transition at WeWork and Arm, and led social impact initiatives such as SoftBank's COVID-19 response and UNICEF ITU GIGA, an initiative funded by Elon Musk, which we all love, and endorsed by the UN Secretary Generals to connect every school to the internet. He was also previously a McKinsey consultant. That means he is so smart. And oh my God, I just love your story, James. He was also the head of UK business development at Generation, a youth employment charity. He graduated from LSE with a first-class honor in government, a Sir Edward Youth Memorial Scholar in 2016, and was selected Fellow of Royal Society of Arts in 2019. Wow, so fancy. I love that. Today, he is really proud to build a business, a startup really true and core to his own mission and passion. With that, everybody, I'm just so excited. And thank you so much, James, for joining us. And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks for the great introduction, and great to be with you.
Yes, and wonderful, James. You have such a magical journey. So tell us, how does everything all begin?
Yeah, well, it all began in Hong Kong. I was born there, and I grew up all my life there until I was 16 years old. And when I was in primary school, I was doing quite well. I was like, I thought I was really smart. I was like, yeah, this is so great. And then, basically this sort of grade skipping thing happened. So when I was in P5, they sort of let me skip a grade. And then my academics started going downhill like crazy. Right? So I sort of skipped my grade, and I couldn't handle it. I also changed schools, and so I wasn't very used to it. It became really challenging for me, and it all sort of peaked in year 9 when I went down from in Hong Kong you have all these classes based on how good your grades were, and I went from the top class to the bottom class in the space of like 2 years, it got so bad that at one point I was ranked 180th out of 220 students, which I remember was quite traumatic. And so I was doing pretty badly until a headmaster of the school at the time, who also conducted the choir, sort of saw some potential in me and gave me a chance and sort of got me into a program for the IB program, like International Baccalaureate, inside the school. And so that was pretty much a turning point for me, because I went from doing very badly to suddenly having a lot more freedom to learn the things I wanted to, and so on and so forth. And I found a lot of my passion in things like debating and singing in choir and all kind of stuff. So I started to find my feet a little bit more. But yeah, so went from there, and then when I graduated from high school, I decided I didn't want to go to university immediately. And I rejected all my university offers, and then I went on the streets and started protesting in Hong Kong, which was a bit crazy. But I'll pause there for now. That was where the story started. I grew up in Hong Kong and had a bit of an up and down journey in high school before I eventually came over to the UK.
Oh my God, that is wow. And James, first of all, what inspired you to not go to university? Because that is a lot of courage to reject all your applications and say, no, what? I'm not doing that. I'm just gonna figure it out from there. What inspired you? What do you want from there? And how do you from that point come to UK?
Yeah, so I must say I didn't have a amazing vision at the time of what I wanted to do in my life. I rejected all my university offers, the first time around out of a sense of frustration, basically. frustration at what I wanted to do with my life, and frustration at the fact that people had sort of paved all these paths that I didn't believe in. So, when I was growing up, everyone around me thought, you're good at debating, you're good at English, you should become a lawyer, right? It was like, that's the path, right? And so I built up everything I did towards becoming a lawyer. The subjects I chose, the grades I was gunning for, everything I applied for to become a lawyer. But the truth is that I was bored to death by the law. The law was just not interesting in any way to me. I was sort of marginally interested in academic issues that are more political than law anyway. So I wasn't into it. And then I realized that as I looked at my offers at the time, if I had gone on to study law, that was it. That was my life. If you do a law degree, you go off and be a lawyer. It's very hard to change careers after that. So for some reason, at the age of 16, I will have completely settled what I was going to do in my life. And I hated that. And so I had a big argument with my parents, and I ended up just sort of deciding to quit all my offers and sort of leave. And my parents were extremely worried, and they were a little brokenhearted because they wanted me to be a lawyer. But one of the bets I made with my dad at the time was, if you let me do this, I will go and try and win a scholarship so that you would never have to pay for my university, education again, and you never have to pay for my education any point after that again. But I have to do this because if I don't do this, I'm not being true to myself, and I will regret this for the rest of my life. So yeah, that's what drove me. It was a sense of frustration more than a sense of a grand vision or anything like that.
It's fascinating that you said you were 16 years old and you already have that vision about making a choice that's true to yourself. How do you able to have that clarity in such a young age? That's such an incredible insight.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think it probably came about from the school I was in, actually. So I went to a school called Dawson Boys School, which has this incredibly strong sense of identity among the sort of students, even now. There's alumni coming back all the time, sort of trying to relive their childhood years, that kind of thing. And one of the core things that place emphasized was freedom and sort of giving people early responsibility to fail. And so I got used to it, I guess. We did a bunch of, I was sort of leading teams in choirs and debating and all kind of stuff. And we failed all the time. We had, big losses in competitions, big arguments inside the team, all kind of stuff. But it sort of encouraged you to think on your own and lead on your own and sort of live your own life in a way and make your decisions. And so it sort of translated back to the decisions I was making in my own life of going, do you really want to follow the path that everyone's paid for you, or do you actually want to go figure it out? And so yeah, to some extent it might be a little bit innate, but to a big extent it's probably also the school I was going to that sort of framed a lot of thinking in my head.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's beautiful. So 16, you reject all the university applications. You go on the street. Tell us from that point, what did you do at the time, and how do you come to UK from there?
Yeah. So at the time, there's a massive protest in Hong Kong in 2012 about a national education policy. And there was a 13-year-old kid called Joshua Wong leading a massive protest, right? And it was getting really, really big. And so I had just graduated from high school. It was sort of May that year. And a lot of my friends were sort of going on the streets and joining in. And a very good friend of mine, who's now a human rights barrister, was like, hey, do you want to help coordinate, a bunch of student unions who want to join this protest? And so we ended up getting together, initially around 100 student unions or so who were interested in sort of joining the protests. And I became one of the coordinators, and we sort of started protesting on the streets and, protesting inside the schools. It went completely crazy. So did a lot of that. And we were really a very small part of a much bigger social movement, and it ended with the government retracting the policy in September. So the government retracted, the movement sort of dissipated because we had achieved the goal. And I was standing there going, I have no university offers. It's only September. So I still have a whole year at the very least. Like, what am I going to do in my life? So I ended up starting a charity that initially trained students in debating. And so it was called Flashpoint. And basically the idea was to train underprivileged students in debating. And so I started with my girlfriend at the time, who is now an incredible barrister in her own right. We decided to sort of do this and train, as many students as we can. And we thought at the beginning, we're like, maybe it's going to be a sort of chill out, train 30 kids, like do a little workshop type thing. Then we opened applications for it, and within around 2 weeks, 400 schools signed up. 400 students signed up, and so we're like, "Wow, that's a lot of kids. What are we gonna do?" So we started getting a lot more of our high school friends and university friends to come in, and so we ended up with around 60 tutors in the first year, and people started going into schools to train people in debating. And then Google funded us with a program called Empowering Young Entrepreneurs Program. And then we had, the Chief Justice of Hong Kong became a patron, and it just started taking off like this. And so throughout this time, it was becoming more and more successful. There was a lot of publicity surrounding it. But there were sort of some nagging feelings in the back of my head going, one, it's not very sustainable in that I felt like once I left Hong Kong, it was probably very hard to keep it going. But second, that, what was really making me happy was not so much the, let's go off on the newspapers and try to spread this or make this a 3,000 person organization or anything like that. It was really more the classes I was going to teach the kids. Like I felt that was amazing. I loved it. And so in the back of my head, I was like, how do I pass this on in some way? So I eventually merged it with a charity that some of my mentors had founded in the debating community, and sort of took it there. And so I moved from there, to applying for university, and I applied for university again and applied to the UK. I applied for a scholarship called the Sir Edward Youde Memorial Scholarship and won it that year. And so that meant that it would pay for my whole university education. So I fulfilled my promise to my dad, and then I decided to come to the UK. And so in my head at the time, I was still thinking I'll become some politician. So, so I chose to study politics and economics, and got an offer at LSE, and I came over here.
Wow. That's so much story to unpack there. And I love that you just start a charity because you felt it was the right thing to do. And then a year to see how it grows and organically, spawning such a huge thing. And then you still having true to your own vision and decided you can still do your own. You could totally just say, I'm going to stay in Hong Kong. Everything's good. I will run this. I'm very, say popular, significant, whatever word you want to use. You are, very influential in Hong Kong at the time. You could use that to continue to grow, but you decide to not to do that, continue to choose a path. Was that a difficult choice at the time? Or that's just straightforward to you?
Yeah, it was quite straightforward in my head. It was really weird. I first of all, in starting the charity, it was very straightforward because I was in the Hong Kong national debating team at the time, and basically every year there's a world debating championships for all the high schools, and Hong Kong has its own national team. I'd been the captain for 3 years, but as I looked back at that team, it became very obvious that the only kids who were getting into that team were the elite school kids. Right? It was like you're either a foreign person who speaks English perfectly because it's your native tongue, and you're in an international school, or you are from some super elite school. And universally, as I looked at it and I was like, who's the smartest debater I know? It wasn't really the elite school kids, right? They were often the kids who were in much more challenging backgrounds, but had real life experiences on the social issues we debated about, who had very authentic and interesting perspectives on those things. And the thing they were lacking was not so much talent, it was opportunity, right? They needed a way to build on their talents. And so as I looked at it, I was like, of all the things I could possibly be doing right now, this is possibly the thing that would use my talent in the most effective way and would help the most people. So I was like, I'm just going to go do this thing and see what happens. So that felt really obvious to me. It was like, I'm just going to do this. And to be honest, I had no idea it was going to turn out that way. In my head at the time, I was like, I'm going to end up training like 30 kids in some school somewhere, and it's going to be that. But it turned completely a totally different direction. and my girlfriend at the time was pretty critical to making it the success that it was, and she sort of drove me a lot to think that way too, of making me make those decisions. So yeah, so it was very interesting. But yeah, it was all quite straightforward to me at the time.
That's incredible. So now you decided to head to UK. Tell us how is life unfold from there.
Yeah, so I came to London, studied politics, thought I was going to become a politician. Then in my second year, so I got elected like president of this Hong Kong society in LSE. And at the time, there was an association of all the Hong Kong societies in the UK. And there's a rotational chairmanship for that. And that year, the rotational chairmanship came to LSE as well. So for first time in a long time, LSE somehow was like, head of all these, societies out there. So at the time, I didn't think much of it. I was like, we'll just organize events like we usually do, and things will happen. Then that year, the umbrella movement happened, right? So this massive protest in Hong Kong where people occupied the government headquarters, and it sort of lasted for 70 to 80 days. And so suddenly there was pressure on foreign students to voice out again, right? It was like, we need someone to sort of say, we support democracy, how are we going to do this? And so again, I was thrust into a position where we had to do something about it. It would be irresponsible for us not to do it. And so we ended up partnering with a bunch of organizations in London where we did things like we occupied the street outside the Chinese embassy and did a bunch of protesting out there. We went back to Hong Kong, did all kind of stuff there too. And it didn't really go anywhere. The government sort of repelled all of the protest demands, and the movement dissipated. And so I had a pretty big reflection around that time of what do I actually want to do with my life. Do I want to go down this path to martyrdom, which is very political, would probably be very ethically persistent and consistent with what I believe, but which probably has no future? Or do I believe I can do more good pursuing a somewhat more commercial path and try to scale social impact in another way, and perhaps impacting not just Hong Kong, but in other dimensions as well? And I also had a big reflection of what actually interests me, what actually is something that drives me. I realized that politics, as much as I enjoyed thinking about it, was not something I enjoyed when it came down to the politicking, right? So I saw some of my friends were very good at the politicking, the sort of how do you shaft someone in the back, and and build a movement, and find out how to sort of create blackmail and all kinds of stuff. I couldn't do any of it. Like I literally felt dirty doing it, and I felt really, really conflicted when I did any of those things. And so instead, what really incentivized me and motivated me was the social work, right? The impact-oriented entrepreneurship. That was what really made me energized. And so I went down that direction. And I left university and went to McKinsey, as a management consultant. I still very much had the sort of entrepreneurship and social impact angle in my head. So I was like prioritizing a lot of projects that would give me those skills. And then around a year and a half into McKinsey, a senior partner at McKinsey had started a charity called Generation, which is a youth employment charity that trains at-risk young people into jobs. And she was interested in bringing it to the UK. There was a team at McKinsey that already set up the UK operations and got it running a little bit, but they were now going to really formalize it and have a proper team that's going to run it. And so they hired an external CEO, and they needed someone to lead the business development side of things to actually help get employers on board to develop the training programs. So I joined that team and started doing the work. And it was a charity that trained people who were going through extremely challenging circumstances, right? They might have grown up in council housing and have really violent neighborhoods and never really got the education they needed, never realized what path they could go on. Someone further than that had been homeless for a long time and didn't really know how to get back on their feet. And we would train them into cloud operations engineers at Amazon Web Services, which is like a complete change in dynamics, or nursing assistants at the NHS, still a massive step up what they were doing. And so it was a fascinating time because I had to talk to a lot of employers to figure out who has the appetite to hire people from diverse backgrounds and who is willing to take the chance on developing training programs where they had to invest a lot of money to make this work. And so I learned a lot more about how education works around that time.
Why social impact is so important to you, Jen? Because it sounds like a quite consistent thing from you 16 years old, the choice you made until up to this point. Why is that matter so much to you?
Yeah, it's difficult to describe what started this. So it's always felt very authentically, innate to me, and that if I had to ask myself what is the thing that is the most meaningful thing I can imagine myself doing, it's always something related to social impact, right? Whether it's helping underprivileged kids get to university or at-risk young people get a job, whatever it is. It's just very core to me that if you've succeeded for some reason, and you've benefited from huge advantages given to you by society, there's something you need to do there to give back. But if I had to guess what made this so innate, it probably started from my grandfather, which is a very rare tangent for us to go on. But my mom's side grandfather in particular, who I enormously respected when I was a kid, and he died when I was around 9 years old. So he died very early. But he was a socialist at heart in Hong Kong, which is a terrible ideology to have when you're under British colonial Hong Kong, right? And then was ahead of his own village, and then built a department store in Hong Kong to become extremely successful, and then built a string of other businesses in there that were things like slaughterhouses in Hong Kong for food, right? And stuff like that, and it became very successful. And was this enormously respected person that people loved because he didn't centralize all the money around himself. He didn't have that much money. He sort of just funneled all that money into improving his community, whether it's his village or his, we were Hakka, so the whole Hakka community around there. He was very dedicated to that. And when I was younger, I respected him because I loved who he was as a person, how he talked to him. But I didn't fully understand who he was, right? I was too young. Then as I grew up, my mom would bring me back to this sort of old house that my grandfather lived in, and he preserved all his diaries. And so I'd read them. And these diaries had these incredible quotes in them, right? And so, the one that stuck with me a lot was, you have to, you have to look downwards at your footsteps as you walk, and always walk upwards in your flow. So what that means is that always, stick to your present and stick to your reality, where you are, focused on, real work that matters, but always go upwards and sort of, accumulate it over time. I loved it. And the other thing was that the only thing that gives you satisfaction is being true to yourself. Right, and this is all written in Chinese, but I won't translate it this time. But basically, that was the message, and I loved it. And so I think those things accumulated in my head, and it was like my the person that I admired so much when I was younger had driven a lot of the philosophy behind what I really wanted to do.
Wow, that is really beautiful that you had the chance to read his diary and really take all those essence, wisdoms, insights with you, even though he parted ways when you were young. And I'm curious, because your grandfather is such a respectful socialist, businessman in Hong Kong, does that shape who you are today? Do you always know that you will come into business world, you will into entrepreneurship? Is that the connection there?
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea, actually. So I never thought I would become an entrepreneur until quite late. So when I was younger, when I was like 14 to 16, let's say, people looked at me and they either thought I was going to become a lawyer or a journalist. So people thought, he's very nosy, he writes very well, and he cares about a lot of issues, which kind of suits the journalist type route. I had very little understanding of any other type of career. I didn't understand what bankers did, consultants. I didn't understand any of it. And I also never understood what entrepreneurs truly did, right? I was like, what does that mean? You're creating a business, whatever. I grew up in a very Hong Kong style understanding of entrepreneurship, where if you create a business, it's like you go run a shop, down the line, right? Or you're building a supply chain logistics business where you import stuff. That's sort of the entrepreneurship in my head. I wasn't creating a tech company or anything like that. And so I never got really that attracted to it. There's only one moment in my young sort of childhood that I remember connecting to this was when I was in primary 6, and I was reading an article, and I was reading an English article in class. And at the time, you had to do this thing where you have to stand up and you have to sort of read it out to the whole class. So I was reading it, and it got to a word where I couldn't pronounce it. I was like, what is this word? Entre, whatever it is. And then my teacher was like, entrepreneur. And I'm like, what does that actually mean? And he's like, well, it means someone who's very innovative, who's very creative, who builds something. And I'm like, that is super interesting. I never thought of this. Like, that is so cool. And I never thought about it that much afterwards, right? It was just there. It was one of the words that I couldn't pronounce. And I was like, oh wow, okay, I'll learn a new word. But years later, I look back and I was like, wow, that stuck with me more than almost any moment in primary 6. And that was really weird, right? I was like, this is really odd. And so things like this accumulated, I think. But ultimately, as I look back, yes, my grandfather was a big source of inspiration. Like he makes me feel like I could do this too. But certainly it was not clear at all throughout my earlier years that this was going to happen. So
that's so beautiful. So tell us, how does that actually come to your mind? How do you realize, wow, I'm actually made to do this? What is that moment? What is that inspiration come to you? Do you remember that? To start Mana?
Yeah. So Mana is almost like a culmination of a few years of thinking. And the first moment when I felt like I have to go do something was around 2 years into McKinsey. And I'd always thought, I need to figure out whether I'm more suited to a job or a business. Because part of me always felt like maybe I would actually enjoy being a McKinsey, like, go off and be a partner and travel around the world and make PowerPoint decks. I was like, maybe I'll like that. But then when I was 2 years in McKinsey, I realized I loved all the people I met there. Like, I loved the mentors, I loved the people I was working with. I could party with them all night and I could chat with them all day. It was great. I, to some extent, liked the work a lot. I liked wrestling with these questions. And the pay was fantastic. The benefits was amazing, and I could travel the world. I could not imagine a better job than that at that point. But then I still felt dissatisfied. And it was becoming more and more strong inside me, going, I'm not being myself. I'm not expressing myself fully. There's some part of me that's not there. So that was when I first started realizing, okay, maybe it's not enough for me to be in a job. Maybe I actually do need this entrepreneurship component. Like I actually just need to start my own business. And then I started going into, what is the business I actually want to start? And I realized also that I would never want to do things like a B2B fintech business or a, e-commerce marketplace, something like it wasn't exciting me. The thing that really excited me was how do you unlock people's potential, right? That was what's exciting to me. And that suggested to me I would either end up starting a charity or a business that surrounds individuals. Then I went into Generation, and it was enormously insightful and interesting and inspirational. And one of the things that sort of triggered in me was that, okay, it focused my attention on one big problem in my lifetime, which is the fourth industrial revolution creating massive amounts of unemployment. And I found that to be a sort of pretty big focal point for me. I was like, this is something I want to solve in my lifetime, and I felt like it was crazy. It was so many people's lives would be affected by it. But then I kept going round and round because I couldn't find a good solution to that problem. Generation felt to me to be the clearest solution in a physical sense, right? Where you have boot camps that train people to new jobs. It takes you just anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks to train them. And it was reasonably scalable. Like Generation has trained around 35,000 people around the world in around 4 years. So it's reasonably scalable. But when we're talking about 400 million people getting displaced from their jobs by 2030, it's like, there's no way these boot camps are going to solve the problem, right? So what is the bigger picture? And so I've been thinking about this and trying all kinds of different models, and still I couldn't find a way to make it commercially sustainable and socially impactful. And it was only until late last year, during COVID-19, when 3 sort of trends sort of crystallized in my head. the first trend was the transition from a company-based way to make a living to a creator-based and passion-based way to make a living. Right? So it was that since the Industrial Revolution, we've created this economy where, companies aggregate people, we give up what we love and we go find a job and we work for 40 or 50 years and then we retire and we die, right? And we've completely given up what we want to do because that's the only way to make money in an economy like this. But if you look back before the Industrial Revolution, the economy is very much craftsman-based, right? There was a lot of artisans, a lot of craftspeople, lots of apprenticeships within families to build things out. But it was also very unequal. Like you had kings and queens with massive wealth, and then not a lot of wealth elsewhere. But now you have this unique opportunity through the internet where individuals can develop their own niches with their own loyal fans and develop their own content and sell them. And they could sell it to anywhere in the world. And they could sell content in almost all its forms, whether it's physical or virtual. And so I looked at that and went, there is a massive opportunity here of just a economy built around passion and built around individuals and persons as brands, right? That was becoming massive. Then the second thing was live streaming and video technology made it for the first time possible for extremely talented teachers to distribute their knowledge globally. And it was clear at the K-12 level already where you have, especially in developing countries, urban teachers providing live stream teaching to rural areas. And it was happening more and more. But then in my head, I was like, why couldn't we get more and more people to be teachers in all kinds of things, beyond academics and beyond curriculums, where anyone can teach their skills? And not enough people in my head at the time were truly teachers sharing their skills in that way. I was like, how do we incentivize people to do that? Because with the technology we have right now, we could actually get them to spread their skills in so many ways. And if we're going to retrain 400 million people, we need at least 20 million teachers, if not more, right? Maybe 40 million teachers or even more than that. So we had to make that happen. So that's the second trend. Video is making it possible to allow talented people to distribute their skills globally. And the third thing is that there are many diverse methods of monetization happening. And as you look at monetization as it stands today, advertising monetization is terrible, right? It takes you 35 million views a year to get to monetization, to get to the sort of average household income. It's only around 3% of people on YouTube make above the average household income. Right? And even with subscription models, only 2% of people on Patreon are making above the federal minimum wage. So the existing monetization methods are pretty bad. If you look at places like China, the methods of monetization are much more interesting, right? You have gifting and live streams. You have people buying books by the chapter. You have merchandise by influencers. You have people being able to snippet particular parts of live streams and pay for that ability to snippet. All these interesting methods of monetization. And as I looked at it and paired it up with the live streaming technologies for learning and paired it up with the person-based businesses, it became quite clear there's an opportunity here to build a business that is focused on the personal brand of the creator, that has methods of interaction that emphasize personalized access with one-to-one classes, one-to-many live streams, and so on. And then, has a business model that allows you to earn enough money with 100 to 1,000 true fans instead of 1 million views. And so that crystallized into Mana and what I want to do in education. So yeah. That's the inspiration.
Wow. And I'm curious, James, of course, you have so much passion, so much light shining to us. You kind of speaking about the thought process and how you come to Mana. I'm curious, were you never afraid? When a question is whispered to you, yes, this is opportunity, yes, this is what I want to explore, but then you had to walk away from all the things you have built. It's just like the choices you made when you were 16 years old. Were you never afraid and just move forward? How were you able to always make a choice like that?
Yeah, I was very afraid, I have to say. Very, very afraid. But I think in my risk calculations, I always over-index on the potential positive outcome and the negatives of where I am right now. Those are two things that I over-index on. And so that by nature pushes me to take more risks, right? So, in when I was 16, it was very clear to me that if I became a lawyer, I would be very depressed and I would regret for the rest of my life that I made that decision. It also became quite clear to me that if I went down this direction, in the 1% chance that it actually worked, I would be so happy. So I was like, yes, I would do that. then when I left SoftBank, it was much harder. I was looking at a situation where, your salary is going up, you are doing great in your job, like you have a great team. You could theoretically stay for quite a while, right? It could be very interesting for a while. But I looked at it and went, if I waited another 5 years, the thing I want to do would probably be built by someone else. If I waited another 5 years, the salary and the position you're in would mean that you probably wouldn't want to leave at all, especially if you have a family and you've built up something more strong and you have a mortgage and everything. It becomes much harder to leave. And the 1% chance that this company goes well is so enticing, so revolutionary, so inspiring in my head that I would much rather run down that direction and see whether it works out. And so I looked at that and went, if I had to think about in 10 years' time, looking back at these decisions, what would I regret the most? I would regret the most if I didn't take this leap. I would regret it even if I became a partner at SoftBank making $1 million or whatever it is, or some other place where I'm making a ton of money. I would still regret it. So I was like, okay, I just have to do this. I just have to go. So yes, I was extremely scared. I had no idea what I was going to pull off or not. But by nature, I think the way I weigh up decisions bias me towards taking the risks, and it could blow back big time at some point in my life. But for now, it feels like it's paying off.
Wow, it's so beautiful, James. You remind me of what you said about when you read your grandfather's journal, when he said, focus on the boot, the step ahead, and at the same time also looking ahead. I felt like you're always looking ahead while focusing on one step at a time. So I felt like, it's so beautiful. I see how it all come back together. So now let's go back to entrepreneurship. And today, Mana, you just started. You closed 1.5 million euros, a pre-seed round, which is really impressive. Tell us, how do you do that? And what is your, secret success source?
Yeah, the secret success is I got very lucky. That's very much it. But, so I raised my first £500,000 at the beginning of the business as a priced equity round when I met my current investors. And I had no company, no prototype, nothing. I had a Figma sketch and an idea, right? That was it. And I think what translated to them was I was trying to tell the story for why I was doing this. Right? It was not so much about here's the exact numbers that's going to happen, or here's the returns you're going to get. None of that, because I knew whatever I put on paper for the numbers is going to be wrong. So I might as well tell them the story and sort of the fundamental demand that's there. Right. So the disproportionate amount of time I spent, in that presentation was talking about the problems I was noticing. And so I talked to a bunch of people about who were either teachers or students and their learning experiences. And I sort of distilled it down to the problems they're facing. And I reckon that if I could explain the problem very persuasively, the solution almost becomes obvious, right? It's like, this is what it's going to be. So I think that kind of worked for them, and they sort of gave me the £500,000. And then, over the next 2 months from there, we started compiling the team, building the first prototype and all kinds of things. And that gave the investors enough confidence to pile on and give another £1 million to me in that process. Now, what happened there was I think I again over-indexed on the story and the vision and the mission, right? So when I was hiring people, it wasn't so much here's the thing I need to build. Do you know how to build it? If you do, I'm going to hire you. Not at all like that. Right? Every hiring conversation I started with the story, right? And it wasn't so much them selling themselves to me. It was me selling myself to them, because I realized that if we're going to find the best employees, they have to be people who are fully mission aligned. They have to believe they're on some kind of massive mission to change the world in some way, some minute, interesting way. And the best people we interviewed were all the people who, within the first 10 minutes in that story component, would get so excited that we would spend the rest of the 50 minutes just discussing, how can we bring this product, how can we bring this idea and stuff like that. And the internal rule that I set for myself and my co-founder of, what is the metric for a good hire? I always say I have to feel like I'm getting an education in the interview. Right? So what I mean by that is that for an average employee, when I give them the problem, they sort of say, okay, how do you want me to approach it? Right? And you sort of give them the instructions and they sort of go do that. For the best ones, and I like to think that everyone on my team at the moment are like this, I give them a problem and they go, first of all, you're not thinking about the problem right. There are all these other things you haven't considered in the problem. Secondly, when you look at the solution, the way I would go about it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I couldn't do this, then I would do it another way like this. But ultimately, I think you need to frame a problem more correctly, and then the solution needs to look like this. Right? So there's sort of they're giving me an education. And every person in the team needs to be a domain expert in what they do. And so I realized the second million really came because I think they saw that there were some super interesting, people who were joining this company and collaborating to build something interesting. And so I guess the secret sauce is, have a compelling reason and purpose for existence for the company, right? That it needs to have a reason for existence. And when it does that, and it's a powerful problem to solve, you're going to inspire interesting people to come work with you, and investors get attracted to that, and the money will come. But all that money stuff is kind of external to this. It's sort of more figure out the problem you're solving and get inspiring people on board, because everything else solves itself from there. So yeah, that's my secret sauce, I suppose.
Wow, I love that. So much passion, so much love. I love that. Now I want to curious, about this process of you pivoting, right? You talked about earlier, you were in this, fancy corporate office, have a wonderful salaries, life is wonderful, you're solving problems, it's exciting at time. Now to a startup where you are the catalyst, you are, really picking each of the winners, the team members, building something. You are so excited, but yeah, you don't have a fancy office. I imagine you don't yet have all things figured out yet. How's that transition been for you? Was that easy? Was it anything surprise you along the way?
Yeah, so I expected it to be really hard. I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going from McKinsey and SoftBank, where literally it's the most curated, supported environment you could possibly be in, and then jumping into the dark. Holy cow. I felt more liberated and more supported than I could possibly feel, in the last few months. And I think what happened there was that, first of all, I inherently just love remote working in the first place. So even when I was at McKinsey at SoftBank, I never really liked the office. So I don't hang out in the office that much. At McKinsey, people often got really annoyed because I would just not turn up on Fridays. Because, usually you go to client side Monday to Thursday and you come back to the main office on Friday. I'll just never go back because I'm like, I don't really like hanging around the office. I start falling asleep if I sit in the same spot for too long. So I can't do that. And, at SoftBank, it was worse because I was traveling all the time. So I really had no obligation to go to the office at all. So I was sort of people call me a cross time zone disappearance act, because people in London thought I was in San Francisco, and people in San Francisco thought I was in London. But then actually, sometimes I was just like in between and somewhere, right? So I never really liked hanging out in the office. And being a fully remote team, and we're building Mana to be a fully remote company, we're probably not going to have an office for the foreseeable term. It's been really liberating. We can still have all our social gatherings and get the team out and grab beers and all kind of stuff, but we can work whatever we want. People have flexible hours. They can jump in and out of things. We document everything meticulously on Notion and on Slack, so that everything, and on Google Drive, of course. You basically have everything documented. And so when we onboard a new person, it's super fast, right? They immediately can find everything they need to. There's very little office politics in any way, right? You don't feel like there's a group of people who are chatting, gossiping together while everyone else is external. So I love that. It actually makes it much more healthy to me compared to even some of the environments I've been in before. But the big transition as a leader, I think, was the tougher part, which is that at McKinsey, the way I was trained to think was to think very deeply about a problem, analyze it extensively, and then come to a solution in the end. And that is polar opposite to how an entrepreneur needs to work. An entrepreneur is more like, okay, let's throw a ton of stuff at the wall and see what sticks, and then go iterate. And so that was a big transition for me. And then also at both SoftBank and McKinsey, you have these enormous support networks and enormous feedback structures where you know how well you're doing because you're talking to your mentors, you're talking to your seniors, and they're feeding back all the time. Now, as a CEO, you sort of have no feedback if you don't actively look for it, right? It's sort of there, and you're sort of there. So I've tried to create this feedback network around me where every month I do a one-to-one with every team member, and I basically get them to just be as brutal as they want to be about the company, about me, about what's happening, right? And just tell me all the terrible things that are happening. And I love it because they tell me the most brutal things, right? I would have like one of my interns who's this amazing, university student would be like, James, you're not owning your role as CEO enough, right? Own it more, like take control, right? Really drive us. I love the freedom, but I want you to drive us more, right? Stuff like that, which I love because you get so much authentic feedback from them, and they're the people who really matter, right? Because they're your team. And similarly, with a lot of mentors and angel investors and that kind of thing, I've had to actively just schedule time to talk to them about difficult problems and get them to brutally tell me what is working and what's not. And so I think it's been a real challenge building out those feedback structures. But in the past few months, now that it's more, it's more there, I feel much more comfortable than I did, maybe when I first started.
Wow. And I'm curious, James, now you have this such an incredible journey, and I'm curious, looking back, do you ever imagine where you are today? Say when you were 20 years old, you were 16 years old. Do you ever see that? And what would you tell your 20 years old if you were something to him?
Yeah. So I have always had a very strong conviction that I would eventually succeed in some way, right? So I have this like extreme ambition, like in that way, and it's not very healthy, right? It's this sort of crazy ambition, but I never thought that it would turn out this way. So if you asked me when I was 16 what's likely to happen, I would have said I would have become some politician, right? So I'll be like some politician in Hong Kong and trying to make some policy, blah blah blah. Then if you asked me when I was 20 and in university, I would have said maybe I would be a partner in some consulting firm or some ridiculous thing like this, where I'd have a commercial career in a fairly conventionally successful sense, and I'll do some other things like I'll be trying to be a trustee on a charity and do some things there, that kind of thing, right? So very conventional thinking. Then now it's a completely different ballgame. Now, if I had to say something to myself at 20. It would be basically stop taking yourself so seriously, right? Don't focus so much on success in a particular way, right? Be authentic, right? So draw out that internal motivation more, like really take that as a thing that drives you. And then finally, figure out who your true friends are. And I think the big mistake I made when I was younger was that I was very consumed by ambition. I was very consumed by the desire to succeed. I had a very set idea of what that meant. That turned out all to be wrong, right? And as a result, I surrounded myself with people who were not very much true friends. Right? There were more people who either were there because of the power and fame they were accumulating, and they sort of wanted to get a piece of that. Or there were similarly ambitious and competitive people who were just sticking to you because they felt like this is my clique and I can be part of this. But over the years, I've realized that the people who truly stay with you and who are great friends, who will be there with you no matter what, are the people who authentically resonate with you, right? Who believe in the same things you do. And they've remained my true friends ever since. And around 3 or 4 years ago, I made a very conscious effort to just distill my life a little bit. So like I just stopped being so I just figured out who are my true friends, and I'll just stay in constant touch with them and really make an effort with them. And everyone else I'll just sort of keep at an arm's length and not force myself to go to parties I don't want to, or go to events that I don't want to be in, anything like that, and just focus. And that's helped so much. Like my entire mentality and person has changed in that time because of this. So that's what I'd say to my 20-year-old self.
Wow. You talk about success a lot, James. You talk about when you were younger, you have an extreme ambition, want to be successful. And of course, today you are the success story every step along the way. I'm curious, at this point in your life, James, what is success looking for you? What does that mean for you now and the future?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I always thought about, the classic sort of money, power, fame, you know, is it really it, right? And then I realized as I grew older and older that all three were things that were quite undesirable to me, which is quite weird. So money, I do have desire for money, but up to a point, right? It's sort of like there's a point at which you can afford all the dinners you want, you can travel to the places you want to, you can afford rent. I don't really feel I don't feel the compulsory need to buy a house, for example. Like I just feel like, okay, you can rent for a long time and you stay there. That's kind of it. And so there's sort of a threshold, and really whether you have a million, 100 million, or a billion, it sort of is completely irrelevant at that point, because it's those things are you can't really spend that money, and it's not very liquid, and it's kind of irrelevant. So then there's a cap to the money part. It's certainly important enabling factor, but there's sort of cap to that. Then there's the power bit, which I thought I was very into when I was a kid. I was like, maybe this whole politics thing is all about power. And I was like, maybe I just want a lot of power. Then I realized power is completely pointless if I don't know how I'm going to use that power and for what purpose. And so I realized that actually my desire for power was in many ways a outshoot of the thing that I actually wanted to do, which is, the thing that gives me energy is when I see other people have their potential unleashed because of something I said or did for them. Right? That's what gives me a lot of energy. And so I realized that to the extent I want power, that's the only thing I want to achieve. You could conceive that in all kinds of ways. Like maybe it's just as a teacher, you have a lot of power to unleash a potential in a kid. Right? Or it could be a politician who's creating a minimum wage policy that gives a lot of people the ability to unleash their potential. It could be many ways, but that power component is only meaningful when there's a sense of purpose behind it. And then finally, that fame component is just flat out undesirable. And I realized this because initially I was very into this thing. I was like, I'm getting so many likes on Facebook, and like on LinkedIn. I'll post more. It was so good. Then I realized at one point, past your close friend group and the people who somewhat know you, everything out there is kind of abuse and controversy and invasion of privacy. Like it's sort of like, you sort of scale beyond that, and suddenly it's just stress, right? It's like people start attacking you, they start doubting you, all these things start happening. And I look at that, I really don't want that. And then let's imagine a situation where I have $1 billion and, I'm a super billionaire and I'm super famous on Forbes magazine cover, whatever. Then that means that my kids, when they go to school, have to have security guards surrounding them every day. I can't serendipitously go to San Sebastian and eat in a street stall with like the best food I want. I can't go in anonymously to a bookshop and browse books for a whole afternoon. My life and the quality of life materially gets worse because of fame, right? So I'm kind of like, this is pretty bad. So over the last few years, I realized that I have these inherent impulses to want money, fame, and power. But that rationally, as I process it, it becomes really obvious that these things are kind of silly. And so now, if you ask me what success means, it means I've got to a position where I have freedom. It means I've got to a position where I have the ability to enact the impact I want in the area I want it, which in my particular case is unleashing potential in individuals. If I can get there, great. And if I can get there without having to, have security guards around my kids and, and worry about being robbed every day and, all those things, even better, right? So that's where I am at right now. It might change in 10 years, might change in 2, I don't know. But that's where I am about success today.
Wow, James, I love that so much. I think oftentimes in life we just follow those innate instinct, whether it's the money, power, what you just described, but the fact that you're rationalizing every single one of it and then almost having a conversation with yourself, or almost having a debate with yourself, and you have so much fun, and you come to a conclusion that truly is something true to yourself, which is so beautiful. And I'm just so inspired. So thank you for sharing that beautiful answer. My last question for you, James, is what advice, what suggestion you'll give for our, say aspiring entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurs today in the process of fundraising, or talking to investors, or just getting something started? Like, what would you say to her or him, given that you've been through the process and you've been so successful at the pre-seed run and really building something so incredible today?
Yeah. The only thing I would say is find your voice and find your purpose. And I say this because all the other things come with this. Whether you're going to get investor money, whether you're going to get product market fit, whether you're going to get scalability, get inspiring people to join you on the team, all those things come from finding your purpose and finding your voice. And finding your purpose, I mean, find a problem that is truly worth solving and that matters to you. And I see this worryingly a lot, where a lot of people go, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, what do you want to start? And they're like, no idea. I'll just figure it out. I want to be an entrepreneur. I know I want to be a startup person, and I'll figure it out. But that's just entirely the wrong way to think about it, right? It's more, you only want to be an entrepreneur if there's a problem you want to solve that matters to you. And too often, I think people spend too much time brainstorming potential solutions and replicating existing solutions instead of thinking about the problem, and a problem that matters to them. So that's one thing. And the second, of finding your voice, it's that, I realized that when you're able to articulate the things that drive you and articulate the mission and values that you stand for, automatically smart and cool people would want to be around you and spend time with you and build things with you. And that voice is so hard to find. We don't often have the confidence to deliver that voice. We often worry a lot about how people want our voice to be. And so people go to public speaking classes and try to be that, or try to polish the way they present and make perfect PowerPoints, that kind of stuff. But finding a voice is nothing about that, right? It's finding a voice is figuring out what is the authentic truth that you're trying to deliver, and deliver in the most authentic way you possibly can as a person. And the sort of examples I often draw up for this is like Elon Musk and Greta Thunberg. They are two of the most inspiring people in the world, and the two of the worst public presenters the world has ever seen. Right? Elon Musk stutters through every conversation. Greta Thunberg has very little emotion delivered in her facial expressions when she speaks, and there's a lot of authentic emotion from what she delivers and the message she's delivering. The polish you have is no contest for the authenticity and the message you're delivering. And so, to me, if you can find your purpose and find your voice, everything else follows. So yeah, that's the one thing I would leave everyone with.
Oh my God, James, so beautiful. As you speak, I just felt this you call it goosebump or love or joy just flow through my body. I feel so inspired. I love how you said at the end, find your voice, find your purpose, and the rest will follow. It's so beautiful. I really felt, wow, so beautiful. So really want to say thank you so much, Jen, for your beautiful, beautiful insight. Thank you for today, taking your time, sharing your journey, sharing your story, sharing who you truly are. And I think really, helped me to see how we all to see beyond what is Mana, what is SoftBank, McKinsey, all the wonderful, labels. Besides that, who Jen really is. So I'm so honored, and I want to say thank you. And I want to thank you everybody for tuning today. We are so excited, so grateful. Thank you so much for your time. And we cannot wait to see you guys next time. Bye, guys.